Hello, everyone. So, this is actually a sort of commission video, if you will, by a guy I work with named Kevin. Kevin had an interesting question, and it was why there seems to be few negative book reviews on sites like YouTube and other platforms where people review books. There's three reasons why this mainly is. Number one, if a book is really bad, most people don't finish it. Number two, if you are a bibliophile and books are integral to your life, then you're going to want to recommend the books that changed your life, to other people. Um, there's a very famous author out there who wrote a book that's wildly successful that's just a bit over 100 pages, and I cannot read it. I've tried. But to a lot of people that's a great book. Many women actually tailor their lifestyle off of the person that was in that book. And so, who am I to really give it a negative review when I didn't finish it? The Probably the second reason why there's just not a lot of negative reviews is going to concern itself, I think, with just the personalities of the people who do these reviews. When you look at even sort of scathing reviews of books, they're not actually that scathing. I think people who like to read a lot are a bit more delicate than they are on most of the social media platforms. And you're just not going to get those really scathing reviews that would, garner a lot of attention. And probably the third reason, and I think it goes back to the first reason, is that unlike some people, and I've noticed this with Gen Z, they'll binge watch a show or they'll intentionally seek out media that offends them, doesn't line up often with their SJW values. I don't think you can really do that with a book because it takes too much cognitive engagement. You know, reading a 500-page book is going to be different than watching a movie that you're not going to like, or even binge watching a season of a TV show you're not going to like. So, on to my review of the Chaos Function by Jack. I'm going to just say Skillingstead, and I'm not going to apologize if I mispronounce that. So, Jack Skillingstead had sort of made his fame off of being nominated for obscure awards in literature that he actually didn't win. But that got him some level of fame, and he's maintained that. In 2019, he came out with this book, The Chaos Function, which was probably kept on the shelf in a position that was closest to the bargain bin until it was going to make its way into the bargain bin. But this book actually concerns itself with a plague that comes out and becomes a pandemic, kills a lot of people, and there's a specific country it's linked to. So, when the whole COVID thing kicked off, this was more or less a book that was in the right time and right place. Now, I've got to really divide my review of this book into three sections: before page 45, page 45, and after page 45. So, before page 45, the characters in this book are just unsympathetic. Look, you know, it's so simple. You want me to really get into your story, you have to make characters that I care if they live or die. And that just doesn't happen in this book. And if you can't do that, this book was only about 300 pages. If you can't do that when we're well past 10% of your book, I don't think you're going to do it. The dialogue is awful. At the beginning of the book, there's this incident that happens. They're going, our main characters are going to investigate a war crime, and there's an explosion or whatnot. And then a couple of minutes later, oh, we're in a hospital and we're having a talk about the state of the relationship. Yeah, just what you need right there in an international thriller, essentially. Passive aggressive verbal back and forth between Scarjo and Kylo fucking Ren. There are no good feminine characters in this book, which is bad because the protagonist is actually female. Now, when I say feminine characters, there tends to be this trend in YA, that's young adult literature, which this falls into, of they want to have the protagonist be female, but they don't want to flesh out a feminine character. So they get somebody who's career obsessed, spits, curses a lot, likes to just screw as much as possible with no consequences. And okay, we're just going to make that very masculine character a female. I call it skin changing. And I think it's just awful. Now, on page 45, this author commits what I'm going to consider a cardinal sin. The characters talk about how there was this book about how smallpox could be weaponized. But they say they thought they read it in a book somewhere or somebody did. First of all, this Jack is an author. So he knows damn well what book they're talking about. He's read it, I guarantee you. It's by Richard Preston. It's called The Demon in the Freezer. You know, if you're going to do that, you best mention the actual fucking book and give that author some credit so he can sell. Now, after page 45, because this book not only concerns a pandemic, it concerns going back and changing timelines and stuff like that. It does it through kind of an interesting way. I gotta give the author that. But there are two things. Number one, it's funny. The main protagonist is in an on again, off again relationship with somebody. But then all of a sudden, when they find out in one timeline that person has to be sacrificed, they can't bring themselves to do it. Yet we see throughout the book that the main character, whose name I actually kept forgetting throughout the book, that's how bad it was, you didn't really care that much for this person. And we don't get the sense that they did. The second sin that I'm going to call out from this book, it's got to be the fact that this book takes major events that have happened. I named just two of them here. And it tries to spin those so that somehow they're completely positive and everything like that. And when you talk about the Iraq War, immigration, World War II, those are very heady subjects. And you can't just write some thin book that says, well, but really it all actually does work out. We just haven't seen the eventualities of the timeline. No, you dumbass. These are philosophical concepts that need a lot of attention, and frankly, you give them nothing but a superficial mention within like a paragraph. So, time to move on and discuss what I like about this book. I've left this slide blank. Okay, that's not really fair. What does this book do well? Well, this book does pacing well. A word that came up in other reviews I was looking at was suspenseful. And yes, the author does have you turning the page, which is not necessarily something that other authors can do. Now, in both my case of reading it and the person at work who actually gave me the book, we were in situations like I'm at work and I really can't do nothing, so I've got to finish a book, and they got it at an airport where again, you're on flights for hours, you got to finish that book. So that is something. The author does fight sequences pretty well. Now, one thing that I think is very bad that this author definitely succumbs to, though, is, for some strange reason, even though there's, guys with guns and multiple assailants, somehow a normal woman is able to just overpower him and stuff like that. Now, there's one woman there who does have combat experience, but still, that's always just unrealistic to me. Now, the concept for the power that alters the timelines, and I'm just going to call it the power, and if you are interested in reading this book, it is an interesting concept. How he did that and how he mixed sort of religion into all that is kind of reminiscent of, Isaac Asimov's Foundation to some degree. The thing is other authors have attempted this kind of thing and frankly done it a lot better. Now, of all of them, I'm only going to mention one because I really only read one book that was already like this, and that is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin, who I thought might be an overrated author till I actually read her work, and oh my god, Does she know what she's doing as a storyteller? It is amazing. And to some degree, and somebody, I forget who brought this up to me, I might be devastatingly hard on this book because I have read, The Lathe of Heaven, and when it comes to the alternative timeline thing and changing the past, I don't think anybody did it quite as good as Le Guin did. I just don't. So I gotta kind of be cognizant of that. But other than that, like I said, this is YA, that's young adult airport literature. And it connected with the audience it was intended for. Now, that audience is to find literature what trail cam footage of somebody crapping in the woods is to find cinema. But knowing your audience is a thing, and hey, this book wasn't for me, doesn't mean it's not going to be for you.